Welcome back, Inebri-art. It is your faithful host, Andy. It's funny. I realized that out of the three podcasts I do, this is the only one where I actually regularly introduce myself. The others, I just assume everyone knows me. Probably a bad habit. But today we are joined by an author, Etchings Book Prize winner, Wes Blake. Welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy. I'm happy to be here, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I can honestly say I didn't do uh I started to read like the synopsis of your book and I got confused because I wasn't sure. So the book is Pineville Trace.
Yes.
Can you give us a rundown? Because I'm not sure if I was reading it incorrect. I was confused by what I was reading, and I'm not sure if it was just a complex story and I was missing something, or I was just reading something. I'm dyslexic, so I'm not the best reader in the world.
Sure.
So
Sure. No, I'm a really slow reader myself, and a lot of my actually find a couple of my close friends are dyslexic as well, and it seems like dyslexic people are often really creative. A couple of my friends that are poets are dyslexic as well. But no, the book starts out probably what you're talking about. The book starts out and it kind of breaks the fourth wall, like in the third
okay.
chapter. So I think that's probably what it is. So it does kind of have that it begins and it kind of has that switch into the, breaking the fourth wall, then it kind of gets back into the story. But I would say I think it clears up more as it moves on. But it does start out and it does kind of have this, this kind of switch behind the fourth wall, where you hear from my voice as the author. So that's probably what you're thinking about. And you get to that the first time, you're like, hey, what is this? Can I trust this voice? And then, trust me, stay with it.
Yeah.
I had a really similar experience to that with a book I read. Are you familiar with Barry Hannah, the Southern writer?
No.
Um, I love his work. What I've read so far, I love. But he's got this short story collection called Airships, which is fantastic. And he's got this book that one of my favorite books is called Ray. And so it's kind of a novella length, but he had an editor. I want to say it's Gary Fiskett John. I may be getting that wrong, but it was originally just this like sprawling book, that was, 400, 500 pages and edited down to 100 pages. And anyways, the reason I bring it up, I love the book. And it was actually, Raymond Carver would teach, Barry Hannah's short story collection, Airships, when he taught creative writing, just to give you an idea of, kind of his influence. But when I started that book, it was like that for me too, Andy. I read the first, 10, 15, 20 pages and I was getting into it and I was getting kind of caught up. The voice was kind of jarring a little bit, but once I kind
Mm-hmm.
of got accustomed to it and got into it, I was totally okay with it. And I trusted the voice, but it started that way for me too. So I do know what you mean.
Yeah. Do you, when you have the kind of idea for your book, do you kind of already have the perspective that you want to tell the story from? Like, uh, are you when you have the idea, are you like, oh, this is gonna be kind of like a narrative driven thing, or is this gonna be more like a character talking to himself, or does that kind of develop
Sure.
as you write?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, usually I'll keep a Word document and I'll just kind of have a list of ongoing projects when I get ideas for things that I want to write. And so I'll kind of have a list of that going for a while. And so, sometimes, like for example, for a while, I really wanted to write a creative nonfiction collection in Flash. And so I had this specific, idea for how I wanted to do it and some of the stories that I wanted to tell. And anyways, the idea for that was just rolling around in my to-do list, for
Mm-hmm.
future projects. So what happened was, with this particular book, I had written about this character, Frank Russet, the main character. For those listening, he's a former Southern revival, faith healer, and he's at this point that the story begins. He's been put in a minimum security at prison for fraud, and kind of undramatic in a kind of an undramatic way walks away from it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that character, Frank Russet, I've been writing about him since 2014. And so I kind of had this on my to-do list. I really wanted to, have this form of this creative nonfiction like Flash. essay collection. I kind of had that in my mind.
What do you mean flash? That's I'm not sure what you mean by that.
By Flash?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. No, good question. So when I say flash fiction, I just mean, typically I'm thinking of the definition of, between 500 to 1,000 words, that
Oh,
gets
okay.
into a story and gets out. And, whether it goes through a whole narrative arc, or it just, digs into an image closely enough, it gives the reader a sense of wholeness, a whole
Hmm.
experience, basically. That's my brain when I'm thinking about that. When I say flash, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I was thinking about that, and then long story short, I just kind of came back to this character. I thought I was done writing about this character, and I just was driving around for work around Pine Mountain, and I just got the idea. Like I realized that, there was this whole other story of this character that I wanted to tell, and that form of like a longer work that works in Flash, where each chapter can try to stand on its own as a Flash fiction piece. That was the form that really in my mind fit this new story. And long-winded answer for you there.
Yeah, it's a podcast. It's supposed to be long-winded. um, so does that sort of flash fiction lend itself to like a, you know, because the way you're describing it, it makes me think of like an episodic TV program, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a good I love that frame for thinking about it, because that's apt. Another way that I kind of thought about it, I'm kind of obsessed with music. Like my wife convinced me to kind of put away all my CDs, because I'm of that age where I had a wall of compact discs,
Yeah.
like people were in the
Oh yeah,
90s.
I know.
Yeah. And she was like, you could put them in you just keep them, but put them in the book. And so I did that. But anyways, I'm just obsessed with, you know, um, the albums that I like best were these albums that, like, the songs, if it kind of work almost as a flash piece on really, really great albums. Like I'm thinking about like Tom Petty Wildflowers, some of the
Hmm.
concept albums in the 60s and 70s, they kind of have that, like you said, it's like a TV show. Like the individual song kind of tells a story, but it kind of adds up to something. Like Willie Nelson's Redheaded Stranger. I mean, there's so many great albums like that. But yeah, TV does it, right? You're exactly right. TV does it. The episode needs to stand on its own, and it needs to kind of build towards something overall. So absolutely, I hadn't thought about it that way. I kind of like your description better than mine.
Yeah, it's I don't know. That's just when you're describing that's the first thing that popped into my head, and I, I I find it interesting because I feel like we're fairly close in age, and you're talking about your CDs, and I've been talking with other guests about how I feel I am days away from a record collection. That it's just like, and I know me, like once I buy one record, it's gonna be, you know, hundreds of them, and that's.
Yeah.
But I really love that tangible media.
Mhm.
I kind of miss having DVDs with all the bonus extras and the
Yeah.
CDs with the liner. Do you? I know so many people, especially my friends who are like hardcore readers, are
Yeah.
really getting away from books, and a lot of it is space, and God forbid they have to move. They're like not gonna move like 40 boxes of books, and that's not light.
No.
Do you have a preference for that kind of thing? Are you an old school, like you want to read a book and
Sure. So no, that's a good question. Yeah, so long story, I was always old school about it. Like wanted, a book in my hand. I prefer paperbacks because,
yep,
the hardcovers look cool, but the reading, it's just not as, it's not as comfortable to read. But I'm a paperback person for sure. But when I was in my so I don't do Kindle as much, but I can see why people do it. Like for one reason, you can read in bed without having a light on,
yep.
and not having the bright lights on. So I totally get it. I haven't read a ton of books that way, and I'm not against it, but it usually paperback. But when I was in my MFA program, I was teaching high school English full time, and I was in my MFA program, and there was a lot of reading as well as writing. And there was one semester, there was just no way I was going to find the time to finish what I needed to read. And a good friend of mine convinced me, like, just try an audiobook. And
Yeah.
so, we live in we live in southern Woodford County, which is kind of close to Lexington, Kentucky. As
Okay.
people listening that maybe not familiar with Kentucky, but kind of a rural area. So I'm in my car a lot, right? So, anyways, I did that, and ever since then, I've been I'm an audiobook person now too.
Oh,
I,
nice.
I
Yeah.
just kind of realized that I'm kind of like you, like my attention wanders. Like I have the wandering mind thing going on like crazy all the time. But there's like this 15-second rewind thing, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
do that, and it kind of helps me track my attention. And I can bookmark places that I like. But I just kind of realized, like, life's pretty short, and my to read list is crazy. So if I read audiobooks, I'll be able to read more books in my lifetime that I want to than if I didn't. So that's how I kind of came to terms with it. But
Yeah.
I really
It
like it.
and it's using that time in your car and in such a better productive way,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of music, so a lot of times I'll listen to music. But even just moving, I told you right before this that I just moved the office from Plymouth to Middleborough, and it's only about a 20-minute ride. But going back and forth 20 minutes every single day, I've caught up on so many podcasts that I've been like, oh, I gotta get caught up on that one. And now I'm kind of like scratching my head, being like, what other thing do I want to listen to? And yeah, I think it's a great way. What was the last? Like I said, I'm not a big reader because of I was listening to do you know who Mary Roach is?
No, no, who's Mary Roach? What
So
tell me.
she is an author and she writes um like science. They're not education, but they're more like informative books of
Hmm.
kind of like things going on in science, but in kind of the things that people don't really want to talk about. And they're all like one book is Packing for Mars, one is Grunt, which is all about science used in the military. She did Boink, which is about the science of sex. And like for Packing for Mars, she didn't talk about like the building the rocket engines. She went and like interviewed the person that designed the toilet and how does the toilet work. And the one story that I remember from an interview with her that made me want to like listen to the book was she was talking how she went to the place where they were building the device to recycle their urine into drinking water.
Wow.
And so she's there and they're like, do you want to recycle your urine? And she's like, of course I do. And so like later that night, her husband's like opening the fridge and he's like, what's this bottle? And she's like, oh, that's drinking water recycled from my urine. And I guess like the biggest thing that freaked him out is like, and you put it in the fridge? Why is it in the fridge? Like it's so, and it's just like, I love that kind of, it's not glamorous. It's a different way of looking at things. And,
Right.
so that's, I was listening to Grunt. Um, and it varies because sometimes you can have a dull reader, which can
Yes.
ruin a book.
Yes,
So
absolutely. I've like stopped reading books if it's a bad reader. It's
yeah.
sometimes the reader can totally make it. Here's a book okay, this is a book. If you're gonna listen to it in audiobook format, here is one that it is great to listen to in audiobook. I think this is an underrated book. The writer of True Detective, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce his last name, Nick
Hmm.
Pazzoletto, perhaps. He said that he thought this is the funniest American book since Huck Finn. Okay,
Okay.
so that was. But all right, now that I've got you there, it's Norm Macdonald's memoir. Uh,
Oh, interesting.
and Norm Macdonald reads it, and it's
Hmm.
so funny. And I don't want to give too much away, but like it's very narrowly a memoir. He just, Norm, he just makes up all kinds of stuff. But hearing him read it, it's fantastic. And if you read it, I'm sure it would still be great to read it. But
Yeah.
hearing him read it is great. And there's some books like that, like Glass Castle. I'm pretty sure it's Glass Castle. Jeanette Walls reads it. And it's hearing her read it's fantastic. There's especially if you can get the reader, the writer reading it or a really good reader, it's great. And if
Yeah.
sometimes it's not so great, if it's, yeah,
Yeah. Especially if it's like a biography, because that just makes more sense that it's
yeah,
literally in their voice. and
Yeah.
I've always um I mean it's part of why I do the podcast because I like to talk to creative people, and before you could do podcasts, that was kind of like how you would do it, was read their book. And the one that's on my list that I have not um gotten the time to even address is Neil Patrick Harris's autobiography,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
I've heard
he
about that.
wrote it in choose your own adventure style.
Oh, did
Yeah, which I'm like, oh, that
he?
is such a great, like, fun thing to do, and kind of like
He's funny. He's really funny
he's
and clever
super
too.
funny.
He is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you my background originally is I used to own a comic book shop, and I would always, do comic cons, became friends with these aspiring comic creators,
Nice.
and I found most of them always tried to write comics that were funny,
Yeah.
and 99% of them failed miserably.
Yeah.
Right? Is it
Yeah.
me, or is it writing funny so unbelievably hard?
I think I absolutely think it is very difficult. And on top of that, I feel like people who do it well don't get credit for it, right? Like, because we're
Yeah.
just talking about Norm Macdonald's book, and it's so funny. And you don't hear many people talk about that book, but and also like how often does a comedy win an Academy Award, right? Or for best
Oh, like
screenplay,
never. Yeah, yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
And like, I mean, some of, and again, it's not like high culture, but c- funny is funny, comedy is comedy. I think
Yep.
maybe like Shakespeare gets credit for it, but he has humor in his stuff, but you're exactly right. It's very hard to do it well, very hard.
And I find like some of, and there's different types of funny. So we do comedy shows, and one of the venue owners is I think he's a funny guy
Uh-huh.
to hang out and have a beer with.
Sure.
And he's like, oh,
He's
I
the
want
owner
to.
of he's the owner
He's
of the comedy venue, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
it's just a bar. It's not a comedy venue, but they have like a performing area where bands and comics perform. And he's like, oh, can I get like 5 minutes next time you do a comedy show? And I'm like, yeah, you realize that's a totally different skill set than you telling a bad dad joke at the bar and everyone laughs, and then trying to
Yeah.
make a room of 50 people laugh. And he's like, no, no, I know. Maybe the time after. And I'm like, yeah, why don't you work on it a bit? Um, but it's naturally funny people are so, like, just naturally, I don't like the word talent, but
Yeah.
sometimes like funny people feel like it's just innate in them.
Yeah.
And oh, sorry.
Agree with that. I saw Norm Macdonald do stand up once, and it was fantastic, and then I've seen Kevin Nealon do stand up a couple times. Kevin Nealon, that
Yeah.
was SNL and did Weekend Update for a while. And so when I saw Kevin Nealon the second time, I just kind of realized, kind of like you said, I get the sense of course he's writing and he's taking the
Hmm.
time to craft, right? But I think a lot of it's himself, A lot of it is just how he says stuff, and it's so funny. And you get the sense like that's who he is. That's really him.
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
love, I always think it's funny too. One of my favorite things is when people get up there to be funny and they bomb. Like some of my favorite, like watching the old Johnny Carson ones when he's doing his bit at the beginning and the
Hmm.
jokes aren't landing. It's
Yeah.
so funny. And to me, and the way he handled it, like Johnny Carson would handle it great. He would like, oh yeah, you like that one so much. Here's another, and he would just kind of go in with it. But I think that's funny too. Sometimes when people fail, if they handle it a certain way, it's even funnier than if the jokes were good.
Yeah. At one of our shows, this girl was telling, her name's Kendra Lansbury, I think is her last name. And she was
Hmm.
telling a joke that um I understand why not everybody would find it funny. It's about
Yeah,
the COVID shot and birth control, and she's talking about how much like science is in her arm because she's got like the COVID shot on one side and her, birth control implant on the other, and
yeah,
and like, I don't want to ruin her joke, but it like crickets, not even like groans or one thing, just nothing, like no
Oh,
reaction from the audience.
yeah.
She's just like, "Fuck you guys, that joke's funny." And her response, I laughed so hard because it was just like she just rolled right over it, and it was her response to me was funny. Like the joke's really funny, I think. But
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes but I mean that's part of that skill, that they learn up there, and how to deal with difficult crowds. And
Yeah.
do you so stand-up comics have that instant reaction with
Yes.
their audience. Do you ever wish you had that kind of like reaction from your stories?
Um, oh, sure, sure. That would be great. I mean, it's I guess the closest you can get to that is kind of doing a live reading, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I taught high school English for 8 years, and some of the most fun that I had was just kind of interacting with students. And one of the I would try to get them like I would aim to have bad jokes, and they're the just I wanted to groan. I wanted to like that's so terrible,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah.
and I would laugh at that. So the joke was just completely for me, but that was a lot of fun. But no, it is fun to have that immediate reaction, and that's something that. So I really seriously rededicated myself to writing when I started my MFA in 2014. And so I've been writing pretty consistently and sticking with it for 10 years. So I'm working on my seventh book right now. And, I've gotten some things published in journals, and this is my debut book, this Pineville Trace, the novella in Flash that's coming out in September. It's the first, full book that I've found a good home for.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, after a while, it's kind of like being in a vacuum, like it's like you're playing music and making music, but you're not able to play it for a crowd.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's something so different to like I used to play, I still play music. And so there's something uh, so fun. Fun's not the best word, but just maybe engaging isn't the best word, but there's something about just getting in front of a crowd and playing your song and getting an immediate reaction, or that's really nice, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've always been like schizophrenic in my creativity where I like have ideas for drawings and paintings, and I'm like, oh, I have a new idea for a new podcast. Oh, I have a new idea for this. And then
Yes.
like a lot of them is stories. And I also have a Word document where I kind of keep track of my ideas.
Yeah.
And I happened to be talking to friends one time, and I'm like, oh yeah, I thought of this idea for a story. It's a Western, blah, blah, blah. And had never mentioned to them because I've never written any of them. During COVID, I started work on a um, a script, but that's just kind of languishing in obscurity right now. But so I had the story idea, so I wrote down the idea, and they'd never thought of me as someone who had story ideas, and so I'm like explaining the story, and like this is how it starts out. These are the characters, and I'm kind of like walking through the basic outline, and I got to the end, and there's like a good twist at the end, and then kind of like a fairly shocking like final scene. And
Hmm.
my friend's wife like audibly gasped at it, and I was like, I'm not even like Vincent Price storytelling you. I'm just telling you the basic outline. And it was such a cool feeling to like elicit that kind of
Yeah.
response. And I've always loved when, I've had people tell me that drawings I did scared them. When I was in
Yeah.
school, I did a sculpture, and like the whole class kind of like wandered around it to figure out how they're supposed to view it. And like, I love when something you
Yeah.
create can have like a reaction on someone. So cool.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And sometimes I actually working on writing an essay about this because this very idea about sometimes, a work of art will haunt us and we don't know exactly why. Like we try to figure out, like, for example, I saw a Rothko at the Tate Modern in London. And, there's just three bars of color, but it had such an impact on me,
Yeah.
just this emotional impact. And I just felt, there's this palpable reaction. And how in the world do you do that with three bars of color? It was there's something almost otherworldly about how that effect gets to you. Because sometimes when I started really writing in 2014, I would look at books that I really loved. And so one of them, Flannery O'Connor's Wise Blood, that book haunted me.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to figure out, okay, let me try to figure out this like as a craftsman, like how can I figure out how this thing is put together and why is it having this effect? And so, of course, you can look at that book, and Flannery O'Connor is an incredible writer, and her short stories are just as well crafted as that novel. But the novel had this effect on me. So you kind of go through it, and I feel like I feel like almost every work of art is a time capsule for whatever subconscious world, inner life was going on of the artist during the time.
Hmm.
And sometimes that can convey itself in mysterious ways to the viewer, or the reader, or the observer. And so I think that part of it really interests me too, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've really been reflecting on life lately. I'm approaching 50 next year. Um,
Yeah.
when I just said that we moved the office, where I moved the office to is right behind an apartment building that I moved into right after I got divorced. So like the worst part of my life was spent
Oh,
like
yeah.
right there.
Oh
Um,
no.
and so it not and like people like, did you regret getting it? I'm like, no. I'm like kind of like looking back and be like, oh, look at everything I've accomplished since then. And but
Yeah.
it's really even gotten to the point where I've thought about like what did I read, what music did I listen to, and like what programming did I watch, and like the things that I loved as a kid and didn't like as a kid, and kind of go, oh yeah, like you could put those all on a table on note cards and be like, oh, this totally makes sense why Andy's the way Andy is, and
Yeah.
it's like I just I don't remember what made me think of it, but there was a TV movie called um The Day After,
Okay.
and it came out, I think it was like 1983 or 4, and it's about like a nuclear war and post the immediate fallout after the nuclear war. It's got like Jonathan Lithgow in it.
Oh,
It's
nice.
and I remember it scaring the shit out of me as a kid, like
Yeah.
petrified. And it's on YouTube, and I started watching it and started getting a little anxious, and at the same time going, why did my parents let me watch this? I was like 9. Like this is like
Yeah.
there's a scene where people just get like vaporized and turn into skeletons, and you're like,
Oh my,
wow,
yeah.
yeah. But yeah, it's really, do you have like those things in your past where you're like, I didn't think of it at the time, but reading, you know, whatever book,
Yeah.
like you can go, oh, that's why I'm this particular way.
Sure. So yeah, it's that's interesting. It's so one of the things with it kind of ties in with when I was working on this book, when I first started writing about this character, I was in Lisbon, Portugal. There's this writing conference there that was tied in with my MFA.
Hmm.
So it was Disquiet International. It's there in Lisbon. And so it was great. Dennis Johnson, that first year I went there, Dennis Johnson, who's, is my hero, my writing hero. He was there and he was so cool and generous and like always smiling, went to every event the entire 2 weeks. And like usually a headliner doesn't do that. Usually they're in and out.
Yeah.
But he was generous. And so anyways, so I'm there and there's one craft talk, and I wish I could remember who said it. I'm trying to dig and find who said it, but they said, write about what obsesses you. And so I really thought about that a lot. And so that's how the character from this story was born. I just kind of started remembering all these stories that I heard. A good friend of mine growing up, his great uncle was he was this revival preacher. And, I heard all these stories firsthand, just like how people just love this guy, and nothing but positive connotations. And, he also had this fall from grace, and it was kind of that, you heard both sides. And I started thinking about that more, like, why am I drawn to that character? And
Hmm.
I grew up in a family, like we were a pretty religious family. And so then I dug into it more, and I remember, when I was a little kid, there was this song, and I just kind of investigating this. There was this song that my dad would always sing, and it was it was some band that never made it, right?
Yeah.
And he went to like Opryland and heard them, and it was a story about this minister that was torn between like being a minister and like this woman that he was in love with, that he wasn't supposed to be. And so there's just something about this character that in a lot of ways, I was drawn to, and I felt like it dramatized this character dramatized a lot of the things that I was interested in, always were. Like I was always obsessed with cats. Like one of the main characters is this cat named Buffalo.
Yeah.
And I've always been obsessed with cats to the point, and I don't really know why. My grandmother had one. My grandmother who was really close to and always stayed with her, but the cat didn't like me and my brother tried to pet the cat. Her name was Feisty, and she would
Yeah.
just run away and scratch at us. Like, but I just always loved cats. Actually, there's a cat sitting right beside me right now. Like
Yeah.
my
So his
wife.
head sticking. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know why I was drawn to cats. But then this cat kind of becomes this character in this story, But that is interesting. I kept digging, and I just found other like I remember The Scarlet Letter was a book that had a big effect on me. Of course, you got that same sort of character.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, that's fascinating when you dig into that. Why was I affected by this? Why is this something I'm drawn to or the opposite, like, not drawn
Yeah.
to? What's that about?
Yeah. Or even just like, oh, is that where? Because I love science and history, and I listen to a lot of science podcasts just because it interests me.
Sure.
And one day I don't even remember how it came across my brain, but I was like remembering as a kid, one of the shows that I watched all the time was Mr. Wizard, and it was just like a kid's
Yeah.
science communicator that he would show you like the simple, experiments you could do in your kitchen, that kind of thing. And I watched it all the
Yeah.
time, and I'm like, is that where that started? Is that, and it's so interesting, like how you don't think about it, but then just next thing you know, you're like, oh yeah, that's a thing I like.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I first started college, I was like, well, what do I major in, And like my first semester, I was a business major just for a lack of anything else.
Yep.
And so really quickly I realized, nope, this is not me. This is absolutely not me. I couldn't do this even if I had to. Like, so
Yeah.
I've got to find something else. And so I always loved reading, I always loved storytelling. So I became an English major and just kind of went down that road. And like that, I think that's the thing you have to do if you're really drawn to something and that's where your interests are. You just have to follow that and it'll lead you somewhere, right?
Yeah. And that's
And you
interesting.
always know
Like,
why or where.
yeah, my son is actively going through that right now.
Yeah.
He graduated high school and he went to college, and I'm like, oh, what are you going to major in? He goes, chemistry. I want to be a chemistry teacher. And I was kind of like, okay, I don't ever remember having a conversation like that before, but sure.
Yeah.
And after the first semester, I'm like, "Oh, how are your grades?" And he's like, "Oh, they were decent, except for my chemistry grade." And I'm like,
Oh
"Okay,
no.
I don't
Oh
want to tell you what to
no.
do." And then he's like, "I think I'm going to take some time off." He's like, "Because I don't know what I
Yeah.
want to do, and I don't want to go into debt to figure it out."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "That makes perfect sense." And I think now he's feeling pressure because some of his high school friends are starting to graduate, and he's still kind of like, "I don't really know what I want to do." And I'm like, "Try some stuff, like."
Yeah.
And like I don't want him to go to school for the, oh, I think this will be a good job. Like
Yes.
find what really excites you and
Yep.
do that.
I, I agree with that. I remember that was the thing because I felt that pressure, when I was an English major. It's like, what are you going to do with an English major with that degree? And I had friends who were engineers and right out of college, they had really good paying jobs and like I
Hmm.
didn't,
Yeah.
or I got out of college and I worked at a Cajun restaurant, and I was working like a second job as a security guard at night. Actually, it was a lot of fun. I loved it. It was a
Yeah.
good experience. And then I wrote obituaries for a while and I met my wife there. And so, it evens out in the long run. You find your way.
And I think for creative people, I personally, I think it's important to do that. Like, oh, I worked in a pizza kitchen for a little while. Oh, I worked at a video rental store. Oh, I did that, because part of the creative process is kind of like intaking all these different things and kind of going,
Yep.
what was interesting about that?
Yeah.
Oh, I hated that job, but why is it funny? And like all that
Yeah.
kind of like I
Yeah.
think that's what our brains do creatively. And if you had like your one engineering job, I mean, what are
Yeah.
you going to write about? Yeah,
That's all you know, right?
yeah.
You don't even know how it's unique from other jobs. It's funny you said video rental and pizza. I was like, yep, did that. Yep, did that.
Yeah, I did
I-
video rental. I ran a gas station for a little while.
nice,
Yeah,
nice.
I was I'm so old. I was a
Me too.
zero operator.
You were what now?
A zero operator. Like when you dialed zero, I picked up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
And now it's like you
I,
explain to
I've got
kids and
one.
they're like, why would I dial zero?
Nice.
Yeah.
That reminds me, like, do you remember when, and I bet some people might, like people our age will kind of remember this. I'm about to be 45 here in a couple
Yep.
months, so we're about the same age. But do you remember when you would call the bank to get the temperature and time? Do you remember that? Was that a thing that maybe that's a
I
Kentucky thing?
that
No.
that might be a Kentucky thing because
Okay.
we would dial zero. We would dial
Oh,
the
okay. Did it
operator.
that way.
And that was one of the
Okay.
common things we would get is operator, what time is it? And
So
yeah.
for a while, what was that like? What was that like? That job?
Um so I did zero and I did 411. Um
Uh-huh.
for our young listeners, 411 is what you would call to get someone's phone number. It's interesting to look back on because the majority of reasons why you dial a zero operator, you have no
Yeah.
need to do. Like you would
Yes.
never like you don't do that anymore. But it was like to
Right.
make a collect phone call. Um, it was fine. It got
Yeah.
silly sometimes because there's a lot of times where people would dial zero, like at a hotel and think they're getting the front desk,
Oh yeah.
and you get
Yeah.
the zero operator, and we were monitored like on a monthly basis. Like once you got monitored once that month, you knew you were good to go for the rest of the
Yeah.
month. So you'd kind of
Yeah.
like maybe screw around with the occasional person, be like, oh, I'll bring
Of
you towels
course.
right up. I'm so sorry those aren't there.
Yeah.
You know. But we also did like a lot of disabled people dialed zero a lot for like assistance making phone calls.
Yeah.
It was okay. 411 is ungodly boring
Really. Yeah.
because if you were decent at it, you would have the number pulled up and the call connected to the recording without ever speaking to them.
Oh yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
just like rapid
That's no,
fire for like six
yeah.
hours, and it's just
That's no fun. There's no
no,
small talk. That's no fun.
no. And they were you actively were told not to like make conversation. And there's all sorts of
So,
weird like FCC rules, like
oh really?
yeah, like if
Oh,
you knew Spanish, you couldn't speak Spanish
oh wow. Okay.
because that's not what particularly phone company I worked for, did. And
Wow.
I'm not sure if it was a company policy but like I get it from a company standpoint. You want to provide a consistent product. So like the person
Right.
dials zero, they get Spanish this
Yeah.
time. The next 10 times, there's no Spanish.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't
but
want
I'm
to expect it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was tough. And like with 411, they could literally be calling from your town, being like, I want a pizza place. And you'd have to be like, well, what pizza place do you want? And they'd be like, I don't know. Can you list them? And you're like, no, I can't do that because
Right.
you would start with, Aaron's Pizza because it's first alphabetical. And then every other pizza place could sue the company because you're providing
Oh.
preferential. So it's all sorts of dumb shit. It
Yeah,
was,
yeah. Like
yeah.
litigious. Like litigious.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the phone company, so they have money, so they have to make sure that people aren't going to sue them because people will.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I kind of did a similar thing. I kind of worked in some industries that were like on their way out. So I worked in newspaper for a while, like in the mid 2000s. And I remember the story there was I liked it. I worked at the Lexington Herald Leader. It was great. There was and people around Kentucky will know this, but this might be an interesting story to everyone else. There were bullet holes in the side of the building. And the reason there are bullet holes in the side of the building, people in Kentucky take college basketball very seriously. We don't have any pro teams, it's just
Okay.
UK, go. And then there's some people, in the western part of the state that root for a team called Louisville, like my wife. But so the reason that, when Patino, Eddie Sutton was our coach, this is late 80s. and there was a scandal. And the reason the scandal broke and Eddie Sutton left, and then Rick Pitino came in, and when he started coaching at UK, he had no scholarships because of this scandal. And
Yeah.
the Herald Leader broke the scandal. They're the ones that uncovered it. So like people drove by and shot at the Herald Leader building. There were bullet
Because
holes.
they ruined the
Yeah,
basketball team. Oh.
yeah, they ruined the basket. Yeah, yeah.
Now, I
So
am not a sports guy, but I'm pretty sure that Rick Pitino was a coach for the Boston Celtics at some point.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. He was. Yep, he was there with like Antoine Walker and a lot of the former UK players at the time. But yep, he was at the Celtics for a while, and he was at Louisville, and he's somewhere in the. He might be at Rhode Island now. I can't remember exactly where he is now, but he's
Yeah.
still coaching, still doing it. But the other job, and I just wrote a. Speaking of you're talking about jobs, this is perfect. So I sold Yellow Pages ads. Speaking
Oh
of
my
like,
God. That
yeah,
is so out of date. That's
yep,
amazing.
yep. And
Yeah.
so anyways, I did that. I actually wrote a story about it, and the story's called Tunnel, and it was just published in this journal. It's a horror story about work, is what it
Mhm.
is. And
Yeah.
so it was just published in this really cool, like online, it's like dark literature. It's called Coffin Bell. And
Okay.
so yeah, it kind of like that's how it felt. Like that story is how it felt kind of working in that industry at that time. Um, but yeah, that was wild. That was an interesting time. Do you remember David Carradine?
Of course. Yeah.
Do you remember the yellowbook.com commercials? That Does that ring any bells? He'd be like yellowbook.com.
Vaguely. I don't remember him being
Yeah.
in them, but I mean, I remember, there's
Yeah.
1-800 collect ads and ads for the phone,
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
So the company I worked for, like that was our spokesperson. And
Yep.
so that would get us in the door because there were so many, like, so many different companies that would get us in the door. And so, we'd mention that ad and mention David Carradine. Everybody knows David Carradine. They had just seen him, on Sports Center the night before his commercial. He's like, "Oh, that's you guys, cool," and that would get us
Yeah.
at the like that. And then he died under unfortunate circumstances.
I
I don't
do
know if you
recall that.
remember. And so we,
I believe he accidentally hung himself. If
yes, death by
yes,
misadventure.
yes,
Yes. So
yes,
poor David. Yeah. So, that was not a conversation starter anymore. We
yeah.
had to
Oh, that's
run that,
funny.
the promotional materials.
Yeah,
But it was, it was interesting. I learned a lot. I met a lot of really interesting people, a lot of small business owners like throughout small towns in Kentucky are just interesting people.
yeah,
It takes a lot of guts to kind of like make your own way. And yeah, it was cool. I got to travel a lot, but it also was kind of a horror story. So
yeah. And
we've been
and
inside
that's
sales.
like one of my closest friends. I made at a job that I absolutely detested. And it was
Yeah.
kind of like as a misery loves company thing, and like we bonded over how much we hated it and
Yeah.
tried to make it as much
Yeah.
fun as we could. And so there's
Yeah.
something about working a real shit job that, you know,
Yes.
kind of I feel like
Absolutely.
it's important in some way. Like if
Yeah.
you've always loved the places you work, you haven't really worked.
Yeah, no, not at all. And
Yeah.
same for me. I've got friends from my Yellow Pages days that were still really good friends, a number of them actually. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
same thing, same thing.
So it's
Yeah.
funny, like you made me think of this when you said Yellow Pages, and I mentioned Aaron's Pizza because back in the Yellow Pages day, I didn't know this until Yellow Pages were obsolete, but there's so many companies called, triple A because it would put
Yes.
them first in the listing.
Yep. Yep.
Like apparently there's a new trend where places are calling themselves near me. So like near me
Really.
pizza, near me sushi, and whatever. So when you're Google
Really?
searching, you're Googling sushi
Yeah.
near me and bop, it comes up first. And I'm like, damn,
Man,
there's always a way to game the system.
that's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
not okay. I'm glad you said that because I'm going to keep my eyes open for that. I did know that about the like all the A1 vacuum and stuff,
Yep.
but I
Yep.
didn't know that they were doing the near me thing for the Google.
Yeah. Like,
Really interesting.
apparently it's really new. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's, people are starting to think of like, how is my business or anything going to be listed? And I interviewed the guitarist from this band called Red Gold Green now almost 4 years ago. Super good dude. Um, and there's no vowels
Huh.
in their band name. So it's like
Oh
RD,
wow.
however else you spell. And I'm like, can I ask why you did that? And he goes, oh, search engine optimization. It's easier to find us. And I was just like, oh, that's
Awesome.
such a weird thing to think about, like when you're making your
Yeah.
band name. So
Yeah, it
yeah.
really is, right? Yeah, I wonder how many bands do like come up with their name for SEO reasons, you know. That's I had never thought about that. The Near Me, like I'm gonna be looking everywhere for that now.
Oh
That's
yeah, yeah. I haven't come across anything locally, but I
yeah.
heard can't remember where, but someone's like, oh yeah, businesses are calling themselves Near Me now. So Near Me dry cleaning, boom, easy to find.
Yeah.
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 So um I can't believe we're at that time, man. Like this flew by. I love
Oh,
talking to
is it
people my
already?
age.
Yeah.
Where can people go to get Pineville Trace?
Sure. So the book will be out September 3rd. If they don't carry the book yet at your local independent bookstore, of course, feel free to ask them to carry it and your local library. It'll be all at all the online places like bookshop.org, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com. If you want a signed copy, you can go to my website, wesblake.com, and we can ship a signed copy by the author if you're interested in that. And those are the main ways. And yeah, so all those options.
And we were talking before the recording that you're coming up to Massachusetts. Are you going to be hitting other places, or is it going to like? Are you going on tour, or is it just like a one stop kind of thing?
We're going on a little tour. I'm actually really looking forward to it because we're doing a lot of the events we're doing in conversation with events, and I'm doing some events with some writers that I really admire and some friends of mine too. So I know we do have the launch event is set for September 3rd in Lexington at Joseph Beth with Julie Hensley, who's a mentor of mine and a great writer. We're going to and I'm really excited about this too. We're going to Madison, Wisconsin. And I should have these dates up right
I was
now,
going to
but if
say I don't think anyone has ever said they've been excited to go to Madison, Wisconsin before.
right, right. So here's why. So in Madison, Wisconsin, there is one of my favorite writers, and a writer that actually was a big influence on Pineville Trace. He's a writer named Christopher Chambers, and he's got this book. You should read it. It's called Delta 88, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a flash fiction story collection. And it's so well written, and it kind of has this consistent point of view, and the stories feel lived in. Talk about like working jobs, I don't know Christopher Chambers well enough yet to know like his life experiences, but it feels like these feel real. You read
Yeah,
the stories, man, this guy really did have a motorcycle and work this job and this job, and it's fascinating. But I'm going to do the event I'm doing with Christopher Chambers, and that one is that's at Mystery to Me Books. That's October 23rd. Um, there in Madison. So we're doing that one. We're going to be in Durham, North Carolina with Carter Sickles, who's a fantastic writer who used to teach at the MFA program that I graduated from. And so that one's Durham, North Carolina at Letters Bookshop and with Carter Sickles. That's September 5th. And we're working on putting an event together in Louisville. We're just working to finalize one in Indianapolis, Indiana as well, with the Etchings Press people, and they've been great to work with
nice.
as well. We're getting some other prize winners to kind of talk about our path to publication there. So those are the main ones, and we're going to be out in California in March. That'll be March 2025, but that's so long in the future we haven't really set a date. And
Yeah.
I just got word today. There's a really cool. If anyone is near Kentucky, there's a really cool festival, Kentucky Book Festival at Joseph Beth on November 2nd. So we're going to be there all
Oh,
day. There's
cool.
a lot of yeah. But it's a really cool festival, and there's a lot of really good books that are going to be there this year by Kentucky writers too.
That's awesome.
So. Yeah, those are some of the dates. We're still adding some and finalizing some, but
Yeah. Well, once you figure out you're coming to Mass, you'll have to let me know. And
yes,
even if we can't get you somewhere down here in Plymouth, you should come and
yeah,
swing by. And it's a great town if you like music and art
yeah,
and food and you
yes,
know
yes, yes. I like all
and
those things.
stealing land from indigenous people. Whatever your
Oh no, oh no,
whatever
not
your
that.
fancy is.
Oh no, you're right.
Um,
There's a history there, right?
yeah,
Yeah, I'll be up
there's
there. It'll probably be around September or October that I'm going to be in Amherst area with Jeff Parker, who's a really talented writer and super
cool.
nice guy. Um, but yeah, as soon as I find out those dates, I'll let you know, and
Yeah.
I'd love to catch up with you all up there.
Yeah, for sure. So listeners, make sure you check out Wes's book. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Anytime, feel
Yeah,
free to come back on. And if you do come up here, maybe we'll make it a live podcast or something.
that'd be
You can,
fun. Yeah,
yeah.
that'd be good talking to you, Andy, and thanks for having me, and appreciate you, supporting the work. And look forward to talking to you in the future.
Awesome, man. And listeners, we'll be back again next Monday. And thank you. I know I said it recently. We've just been hitting 400-ish episodes, and thank you everyone for listening and making that happen.
Congrats, that's great.
Thanks, man. And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at Inebri-art.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at Inebri-art.com. Thanks again for listening.